Welcome. Today we're going to learn about multiplying two binomials together. Now, what we mean by binomials is they are a two-term expression. Two-term meaning something like x plus 3. So this is one binomial, and we're going to multiply it by x minus 5. This is a second binomial. They normally put them in parentheses like this, with the two parentheses next to each other. Remember, if you don't see an operation, that means multiplication. So we're multiplying these two binomials. A method that a lot of teachers teach is called the FOIL method. Now I'm going to teach this to you so you'll know what it is and you'll be able to refer to it. But I actually don't like the FOIL method because it only works for binomials when you multiply two binomials. When you get to trinomials, with 3 terms or 4 terms or 5 terms, it doesn't work. FOIL doesn't work in all aspects, but it does work with two binomials. Now, what the FOIL method means is the F stands for we're going to multiply the first terms together. This is the first term of my first binomial. This is the first term of my second binomial. So I multiply those two together. I get x times x is an x squared. Then I'm going to multiply the outer terms. Outer meaning this outside one is an x, and this outside one, the two on the very edges, are on the outside edges. X times a negative 5 gives me a negative 5x. That's the outer ones. Then I multiply the inner ones, the two inside ones that are next to each other, the 3 and the x. When I multiply those, I get a positive 3x. And then the last L stands for the last two, the last ones of the two binomials, the 3 and the negative 5. So I multiply 3 and negative 5, and I get negative 15. Almost always, I'm not going to say it always does, but almost always, the two middle terms that we get when we multiply the outer ones and when we multiply the inner ones, those two middle terms are like terms and they can be combined. We have a single or a negative 5x and we have a positive 3x. These are single x terms. They can be combined, and so your final solution would be minus 5 plus 3 would be a negative 2x, and then minus 15. So almost always we get this 3-term or a trinomial solution when we multiply two binomials together. Now, we don't always get trinomials. Sometimes the middle terms cancel. We're going to show you that aspect. But here, we're going to assign 8 and 9 in Algebra 1 under Z, polynomials. So let's first show you some of these in here. Now, you might not get single x's. You might get higher level things here. Like, for instance, whoops, I left my Excel. I was just trying to reduce that. But this one here, if you'll notice, has a 2 in front of this h. That's all right. The process is still the same. So for this one here, I have that h plus 2 times the 2h plus 3. What I usually like to do, rather than the FOIL method, because this works in all method, is I underline the first term in the first one, and I'm going to multiply it by every term in the second one. So I'm going to take the first term and multiply it by the 2h. So h times 2h is 2h squared. I'm going to take that first term and multiply it by the second term in the second binomial. H times 3 is 3h. Then what I do is I look at the second term. So now in the first term, I'm going to take the second term and I'm going to multiply it by every term in here. So I do the 2 times the 2h. That's going to be 4h. I do a 2 times the second term in the next one. 2 times 3 is 6. Again, I look to see if those two middle terms combine, and they do. So I have that 2h squared in the front. I have a 3h plus 4h, which is 7h. And then I have a plus 6. I think the hardest thing about today's Excel assignment is just typing everything in. The 2h squared plus 7h plus 6. And submit. And we have our solution. One of the things that the most common mistake, I think, when foiling is just dropping your minus signs. So let's do another one here. We have this 2m minus 1 times a 3m plus 1. A lot of students have learned what's called the rainbow method. The rainbow method is we distribute in with these arrows like that into that. So I know I'm multiplying the 2m by the 3m. That's the first times the first, which is going to be a 6m squared. Watch your properties of exponents. I'm going to multiply the 2m times the 1. That gives me a 2m. Now what we do is we take that second term and we distribute it to the first term and the second term. So we have this kind of looks like a rainbow thing here. Negative 1 times the 3m gives me a negative 3m. A negative 1 times a positive 1 gives me a minus 1. Now what I do is I look at my two middle terms to see if they are like terms, and they are. So I do 6m squared. 2m's minus 3 is going to be a minus 1m. You don't need to write the 1. Minus 1. And there's our solution. 6m squared minus m minus 1. And we submit, right? That's all this lesson is. Now, the next one, since I said I'm assigning both 8 and 9, says multiply two binomial special cases. Special cases is because sometimes students get very confused when they see an exponent on the parentheses themselves. Such a common mistake is to take that 2h plus 4 that's being squared and just to square this term and to square this and say, oh, the answer is 4h squared plus 16. That is incorrect. Wrong, 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 because you're forgetting to FOIL. A 2h plus 4 squared means to multiply it again by itself. 2h plus 4 is times another 2h plus 4. We got to distribute, FOIL, do the rainbow, whatever method that works best for you. 2h times 2h. First times first is going to give me a 4h squared. First times last is going to give me a 8h. Last times first is going to give me another 8h. And then last times last is going to give me a 16. I have two middle terms that combine. So I have my 4h squared, that's the first term. I have my 16h, and then I have my 16. So I have three terms. And you notice the one up here, I lost my middle term. If you just square both individually, you lose the middle term. So we get this three-term expression. So don't confuse it when you see an exponent like this on the parentheses. If you need to, write them out separately and then do your distributing. So that's one that students will often make mistakes on because they don't distribute, they just square each individually. 16h plus 16. Okay. Another issue is sometimes the middle term actually cancels. Let's look at this example. If I have a 3w minus 1 times a 3w plus 1, again, I'm going to do the first times the first. That's going to be a 9w squared. The first times the last, or the outer ones, that's going to be a 3w, because 1 times 3w is 3w. I'm going to do the inner ones, or the second one, times the first one, which is going to be a minus 3w. And then I'm going to do the last times the last. Negative 1 times positive 1 is minus 1. My two middle terms, they happen to be exactly the same size and the same w's. 3 minus 3. Oh, wow, that's 0 w's. So I have my first term, the two middle cancel, and the last one. And we get a two-term expression. The third term actually is eliminated. So that does happen. Sometimes you won't get all three terms. Those are basically the two special cases that you're going to see. So be very careful that you don't accidentally think that there always has to be a third term. Sometimes there doesn't. But at the same time, don't accidentally not FOIL when it's a squared on the outside of a parentheses, like on the previous problem. Again, this one, by the way, these are called conjugates of each other. I don't expect you to remember that word conjugate, but conjugate means that it's the exact same two terms, 3W, 1, 1, except one's minus, one's plus. In other words, the sign in between them is different. Those are called conjugates. And when they're conjugates, that middle term always cancels. If I take 2Q plus 2 and I times it by 2Q minus 2, if you'll notice, same first term, 2Q, 2Q, same last term, 2 and 2, except one's positive, one's minus. So the opposite signs in between, they're called conjugates. When we multiply them, 4Q squared, first times first times last will be a minus of 4Q. Last times first will give us a 4Q, that's positive, and last times last will give us a minus 4. The two middle terms cancel, and we get a 4Q squared, that's that first term, minus 4. Again, those are called conjugates. I don't expect you to remember that, but I want to introduce that to you, that term, so you'll understand it, or at least have heard it once or twice. 2Q squared. Again, I think the hardest thing about this is just typing things in, minus 4. If you have any questions on today's homework, please email me or get on at 1 o'clock and I will help you. Now remember this one here, to remember to FOIL, write them out separately. Don't just do the 2u squared plus 1 squared. That would be incorrect. You have to FOIL it. Write them out separately. And we will talk to you next time.